pledge allegiance first and then we'll do the. we'll do the- I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, same sign. Motion carries. First item up for discussion is Quit Strand Security. And Kevin, if you're ready.
So this product was brought for a fitment at the safety and security meeting by the middle school. They ended up receiving a quote on this. It's not bulletproof, but it is a film. I would say it's bullet resistant. And I have a little video to share. The Safety and Security Committee, the recommendation was to go and get estimates on the cost. This is the only company in our area that I was able to buy. There might be more if we dig into it, but this is, our first attempt at it. We called a lot of different window places, and this was the only one that we found that provided the service. This was also based because of the Tennessee shooting, where they shot through the windows and just walked right in. So we'll start with this video. Assessment. Well, the differences between the windows is just the film quality. So you'll notice they have one security film and then a different one on one surface. So that's just a little demonstration of the film and how it prevents somebody from actually entering the building or gaining access through the building. There's also quotes that were sent out. So 14 millimeter, the 14 mil film is what federal buildings have on them. So the first quote has 14 mil on on both the exterior and interior window. The second one,
Can you say that again? It has it on, when you say interior and exterior, so it's on the inside and the outside
on
of
the
the window,
inside.
so it's like this on both sides
so
of the
you-
glass?
well, our windows are double pane.
Right.
So you're gonna have that on the inside and the outside.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was doing the same language, so.
And how much was that quote?
That one's 37,000.
And that does the whole building?
It does not do the. Without going into which windows it would be, it's the most vulnerable locations.
Okay.
Solution 2 has the 14 mil on the outside and then an 8 mil on the inside. And that one is 35, well, basically 36,
Same windows?
same windows. Solution 3 is 14 on the outside, 8 on the inside with solar. So has that solar protection from the sun coming in. And that one's at 37. Last solution is 8 mil on the inside and the outside on exterior windows, and then entry is 14 on interior and exterior windows, so. And that one's 33, a little over 33.
You have a preference for any of these four?
This company provided a window that was about 5 years old and been sitting outside. And a 9 millimeter was used to shoot the window. The bullet did not penetrate both windows, the first shot. And then the second shot and several shots after that only put holes in it. And that was at 8 millimeters.
Front and back.
Front and back. My preference is actually the lowest. Where certain doors will be exterior, interior thicker. Well, watching the video as you went, the thicker it was even harder for even a body to get through. And to me, with our gap of time that we have out in the country, I think this is it is expensive. I'm not saying it's not. But it closes that gap, that response time for the sheriff's department. I know that our city police will probably respond if there's a shooting going on as well, but at Wistron, we have an increased gap time. I mean, if we can't get everybody locked down and everything locked down with the new building in 5 minutes, that falls on other people,
Right.
including myself.
You have contingency funds to pay for it?
Talking with Dan, he gave me an estimate of about $100,000 of contingency funds. He said he'd have the final number at the end of July when things start to finalize on the building.
A little information on which windows and doors and how you choose what is considered
Which
I
ones
would
are?
probably-
vulnerable.
Probably decline to answer that in
Oh,
a
okay.
public session,
Oh, okay. Oh,
just for the
yes.
sake of
That makes
security.
sense.
Right.
Yeah, I think that makes great
I mean-
sense. I just am like,
I've wondered, I wonder myself, but I think, that would be best handled internally.
thank you. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Perfect sense.
If,
It would have-
if you chose to do all of the windows, what would the cost be?
I haven't even looked. That was the dream.
That would
price.
exceed,
That would
probably
be the
exceed
dream
its
price.
contingency.
Yeah, I don't think they would see the
No.
contingency.
So I'm gonna say as somebody who has managed a building that has had a significant wait time to get support to you. 5 minutes is a long time. If you can get 5 minutes or 6 minutes, I say go for it. Every minute that you get is you're saving lives. So I support it.
I'm on board, especially since it will be part of the contingency. Why not?
Mhm.
You know, I mean, always safety first. It's kind of a no-brainer.
Mhm.
So what would be the next step here? I negotiate with them to try to get a lower price, find maybe some other bids.
I would see that as Kim negotiating that for you.
We could partner together and do some time and put based on the price. We don't have to legally go out to bid. It's under the $50,000 cap. We don't have to legally go out to bid. It's good. But if we don't have anyone in our area, the mobilization of their crew and so forth to do that is, if you have to go to Northern California or,
This
what I
company
mean?
is out of Tri-Cities,
Mhm.
and also I can. They have done another district's windows and doors in the Tri-Cities, and I can't remember if it was Kennewick or Richland, but it was one of them.
Maybe we could even, before we get, we're always busy, but before we get real busy, we could even go take a look at what does it look like? I mean, ask them some questions about the workmanship and there was any problems with installation? Did it visually turn out like you think it's supposed to? We have to test that the product that's on there is correct, but did they have any workmanship issues or anything? Basically a reference check, right?
And I know Jody had gotten a bid. I don't know if they did at Riverview, but maybe this would be a negotiating point too, that if it were more than one school, maybe there would be a lower price. I don't
Like,
know, just a
think,
thought.
at our security meetings, we kind of discussed this film for quite a while after
Mhm,
what happened in Tennessee, Nashville, right?
mhm,
And looking at all of our buildings, we do have, that potential. And I think it's something that I feel that we as a board need to kind of not only move forward with looking at this on all of our buildings, but especially
Which,
Kevin, since he's so far out
mhm,
of town, and response time would be
yeah,
significantly
totally
different than
agree.
in town. So
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Are your doors, are your main doors, are they glass doors? And do they have like the mesh in the doors? So are you proposing having this on the doors also, the entry doors?
Yes and no.
we won't discuss that in a public. meeting.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
But there is potential to put it on.
Mhm,
I know at Patterson, we went out and got the farmers gave us the nicest, biggest boulders that they could find. And we did some nice planting of those strategically in front of doorways, and we called it landscaping. So that, I think it was the Yakima County, the Yakima Sheriff's Department said that was a really great idea to keep cars from just driving right into your building through your front door. So, but we called that landscaping. So.
mhm, There you go.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you coming today and presenting this. So
Yeah.
I think we'll move forward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Next up is 2023 levy and tax update. That's Craig. Corey.
Good evening. How is everyone?
All right.
Hi, great to be here. I've been sitting all day, so I'm gonna kind of hover over you. if you don't mind.
Not a problem.
And I will commend you on your attendance. I've been to maybe 15 board meetings this summer, first one with all 5. My name is Corey. I work with DA Davidson, the firm that helped provide the financial support for this beautiful high school. I parked on the wrong side and kind of walked through, and it was a nice little tour. I mean, it was amazing. You may recognize, I think that you may recognize my predecessor, but I worked at the ESP 101 in Spokane for 15 years before joining this firm 5 years ago. So what I'm here to do tonight is I spoke with him at Silk Lake and Amy here, and we've given updates and said, well, maybe it'd be good for the board because those are kind of a hot topic right now. As a board member, you probably hear a lot about taxes. And so our goal tonight is to do a high level overview of what your levies have been historically taxed and historically and provide facts. This isn't really an opportunity to like, let's set the levy rate today. You have plenty of time for that. But summer's a great time to visit, give the board some background on tax rates, and then give you time before November when you'll adopt what measure you're gonna take forward to renew. So please ask questions as we go. I put together about 20 slides. Not all of these are really pertinent, but I left them in here. We'll skip a couple because you probably don't need a lot of details on bond. You just passed a bond. There's not another bond probably in a decade at least. So, but they're in here in case you want something to reference in the future. So, and stop me if I skip something you want me to cover. And that's it. Let's go ahead and get forward. So I'm actually on slide 2. A quick overview is education programs and operations levies are up to 1 to 4 years. You last passed your levy in April 22. Now, you can do this up to 4 years, but if you recall, the last time you asked for your election, you asked for 3 years. And after that was challenged by the voters, then you shifted to say, we're gonna ask for the same amount, but let's just shorten it to 2 years. And that's actually a really great strategy because we have noticed that 3 years are supported a little bit less than 2 years. It didn't used to be that way, but since McCleary, it has been that way. So I'll share some McCleary facts and why we're seeing these challenges, because you're not alone. What we're noticing is 21 school districts failed to pass their first levy the last 2 years. And if I had to go back a decade, that just didn't happen. So we have a new environment here that we're operating in. The capital projects levies can be 1 to 6 years. We're gonna dip into these a little bit, but you've never had a capital projects levy. A majority of capital projects levies are for technology. So if you're ever thinking about, here's our EP&O levy, we'd like an earmarked technology fund for Chromebooks, servers, Wi-Fi access points. That's something you could consider as a second type of levy and not jeopardize your general fund. You choose costs at the same time. People robust levies, and then bonds, they vary. 20 years is the most common. Your last bond was passed in 2017. It took you four chances, right? And I only go back about the year 2000. So you might have had a few tries back then to do. But your bond is now, what, 6, 7 years old, and it is callable, which means you can start to think about refunding it in a couple of years. That's something that our firm will look into and let you know if you can save your taxpayers money by refunding a bond at a lower interest rate in 2027. That's something that we're the district can give you estimate. So it depends on the right conditions, but something to keep in the back of your mind as people ask you, well, can our bond be refunded soon? At 6% rates. In the next one, this is the elevator speech on what an EP&O levy is. So on slide 3, you'll see this education program and operations levy is, if you're looking for an RCW that talks about what a levy is, you're not going to find it unless you look for the word enrichment. And that's a little frustrating because a lot of our levy is still used for unfunded teachers, school nurses, keeping the lights on, janitorial. A lot of your local levy still is for basic education. But in 2018, what happened is when the McCleary bill was passed, the state said they fully funded education. So if you're reading a newspaper in 2018, they raised the state taxes across every county and then funded extra money to each school district through teacher salaries. So that was great to work with your teachers. Some of your teachers were coming into a teacher shortage. Not a lot of people were going into the industry. Salaries were low. So we fixed that, but we really didn't fix that you didn't have enough money for curriculum, lights, janitorial, nurses. So we didn't really fix the problem. However, the newspapers and the legislators said, you're fully funded. So keep that in the back of your mind. They define your levies enrichment, and it is enrichment. You're using it for sports, you're using it for arts and drama, but you're also using it for some basic education still. We used to call these maintenance and operations levies. So if you've been around a while working in school levies, you'll remember this, but we actually rebranded as a state because people started passing capital levies. And if you have a capital levy and a maintenance levy, it got very confusing. And so we thought, well, a maintenance levy we're not just buying paint and, fixing water fountains. We're actually paying for teachers, nurses, and curriculum. You are subject to lids. You cannot ask for whatever you want. And in your case, you are able to collect the lesser of $2.50 of your tax base, all the business and residences of your community. So the lesser of that, or $2,500 per kid. Anytime there's a lesser formula, somebody's getting less than somebody else. So we still have massive inequity. So you can tax $2.50 on your base, and you still won't be collecting $2,500 per pupil when other school districts are. And that number today has been adjusted by inflation to $2,900. You're not collecting $2,900 per pupil, other schools are. Lesser formulas are inherently inequitable. So another thing to share with your legislator, whoever's the legislative rep, this is a fun one to wrap your head around. But you're still not operating your max as well. Many schools are not able to pass a levy at their max. So sometimes these maximum are kind of futile as well. The good news, you only need simple majority, 50% plus one. The bad news is it's harder to get simple majority today than it used to be to get 60% supermajority right before it was passed in 2007. So we have some new challenges that they didn't have previously. And I don't need to rehash those through this meeting here. There's no validation. It does not matter how many people show up. If you get 50% plus one, it passes. Bonds do require validation. So you might recall that previously. You get 2 attempts in a calendar year, as you learned, in 2022. And you have to choose wisely on which months are the best. We'll share that with you coming up. But we have, I believe, 3 districts this year that are operating without local resources, and one's down the street with Kennewick. So it is happening in areas that have never happened before. And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but more of showing there's an opportunity to focus on communication. And that one of the reasons is starting early as a board is just getting your whole mind wrapped around what the goals are moving forward. On the next slide, what I did is I put together your history. On the history slide 4 shows in green your EP&O levy. You'll notice a little bit of a roller coaster, and this is common, right? Not everybody just votes the same way every time. There's people coming and going, but you'll notice you peaked with numbers in the 72, 73% range. Those are huge numbers. We don't see those in the state. The average is in the 50% range. But all of a sudden, look at between 2018 and 2022, you can see the snap of a finger how fast things can change. And this changed for almost everybody in the state. Districts like Issaquah, Lake Washington, Mercer Island also saw huge decreases after 2018. So you're not alone. But you rallied April 51.1%. We say anything above 50.01 is a landslide. You will notice it's hard to get super majority, let alone simple majority now. And but yeah, there's a huge base of support here. The key is to tap back into that, right? We've had some challenge over the last few years. How do we get back to where we were? I think time heals some wounds, and getting back to just what we do at public school districts. But encouraging that people did come back around, and that second attempt was fruitful, or 2023 would have been pretty rough. And you'll notice the bond was pretty tough too, 56, 54% before that attempt. There's another one that I didn't show on here that was like 2002 because I ran out of space. But I thought it'd be helpful to see the history. On the next slide is the state history. So in slide 5, I work solely in Washington State, and this is the average success percent of all the school districts in Washington State. You'll notice that before simple majority is approved, it wasn't that easy to pass levy. That's when it was 60%. There was a constitutional change, and then since then, 2008 and 2017, we were cruising, 98% passage. The only double levy failure in a decade was Lyle. And I think Lyle was right south of here on the Columbia Gorge. So in a decade, we had 1 double levy failure. We've had 10 in the last 3 years. And these are big districts like Marysville, Centralia, Woodland, Kennewick. So it's been challenging. And Finley, also another one down the street. But I'm a forever optimist and take a look at 2023. Notice we're up 1% from last year. We're at the bottom of the U, heading back up. Time is healing some wounds. You might ask too, what's that number below the year? That number below the year is how many schools attempted levies. So there's 41 measures on the ballot. In 2024, you're also not alone. There's 145 school districts that need to renew their EP&O this year. So it's a big number. You're gonna see a lot of information flying around there, a lot of sample information if you're looking for some peers on what they're doing as well. But you can see this U's been difficult. I call it the 1-2 punch. The first punch was McCleary. Telling voters you're fully funded didn't help. And then having remote education, some of the other things that we've seen in the newspapers as well. So that's a quick, levy. Let's talk about capital levies, kind of plant the seed is in the future, that the board of technology levy or a levy to fix elementary school roofs or HVAC units is important. There's no dollar limit on capital levies. It is also a simple majority, but you can stretch it a little further and go out to 6 years. So if you're trying to collect an amount, you can stretch it out further. And the most common uses are technology, safety, security. And on the next slide, you'll see they do okay when it comes to Washington State, 83% passage. But take a look at last year. In 2022, there were 80 capital levies. So that's hitting records. And what we're noticing is there's a lack of construction funds going into schools because bonds haven't been passing. Those schools have been compromising and focusing on technology, focusing on repairs. So we're having a lot of capital levies lately. Actually, we can skip slide 8 and go right to slide 9. This is the elevator speech on a bond. I'm not going to go into in details because it's probably not on the horizon to you, but now you have access to it. I will share with you that math. We are a 60% supermajority state for school construction. We're just like West Virginia, Alabama, and Oklahoma. So Texas and Florida, very conservative states, it's easier to pass school bonds in those states than it is in Washington. And we have an office in Dallas, and they're passing school bonds to do high school football stadiums at a more rapid rate than we're passing bonds to pass elementary schools. So there's some challenges in our state. Will this change in the near future? We'll see, but there's been some pushes in Olympia. They've just been kind of taken second stage to some of these other learning issues that are happening in education. Slide 5 shows you, it's been challenging to pass the bond lately. 8% passage this year, 21% passage last year. If you look when you passed yours in 2017, great timing. 58% passage rate. There's great morale in our state for public education and things were getting supported really well. So districts that are trying right now aren't really seeing that other than Pasco, which had really great success down the road. So now more information that's pertinent to your decision making now is on the next slide is when's the best time to submit a proposition to the voters? You got to experience 2 months last year. You tried February and then April. What you'll notice in tan is February is a great month, so is April. But February is the strongest strategic month from my perspective because it has the highest S percentage. And if for any reason there's a hiccup, you have 3 opportunities to run again. Districts that you thought to yourself, well, April worked really well, let's just wait till April this year. Well, now you only have August or November as opportunities. And if it doesn't pass in April, you're gonna be passing a budget without knowing what your local resources are. So February, April's a great 1-2 punch. Another reason I like it is in February, you tend to share the good news. This is what your taxpayers do. Accountability is one of the biggest pieces of levy support and teacher support of this levy. What are you using those resources for so people can connect with that? And you share that in that February election. In April, it comes down to a little bit of a more, if it failed in February is, this is now what we need to remove. You don't really share that in February. It's not really a positive message. And so in April, that's another reason they're so successful is that your second attempts usually do a lot better because people will, oh, I forgot to vote. No voters are great at voting no every time. Yes, voters are great, but there's this middle group that's just kind of a little lackadaisical with voting. So it's important to share with them the facts about what you're using your resources for. November's not the worst, but it's just the timing is it's a little risky, right? You have like a month before the fiscal year starts. I will be really brief in slide 12, knowing it's summer and it'll spend on that here looking at statistics. But I'll share with you in the future, if you ever have to consider running 2 things at once, probably not something under consideration today, but in the future, a technology levy or when your bond matures and doing another bond for an elementary school. Putting them together has been really strong statistically because you can communicate everything all at once. Instead of asking for a tax measure here and then a year and a half later asking for another one and then another one, you ask all at once. This is what we need for the next this many years. That has been really well supported. And we think from a PR perspective, easier to communicate instead of taking time because people get confused. Didn't you just ask for this? Like, no, that was an EP&O levy. This is a bond, or no, this is a tech levy. So there's some strength in comparing things and combining. It didn't used to be that way. Before 2008, nobody put things together. And now we're seeing some power there. So I'll skip this. I won't talk about the numbers, but you have it in case you have questions. So I really like visuals. This is a visual of your tax base. So these are who pays the bill. And what you're gonna notice about who pays the bills is just steadily increasing with nothing too crazy. The statewide average increase last year was 22%. You went up 7%. So as you think to yourself, well, that's not good. I want the growth in our community like other areas. Growth is tough. You're shaking your head. Growth is tough because if people see their tax statement go up 30%, the first thought is my tax amount is going to go up 30%. Not quite 100% correlated, but mostly true. So you had 7% growth last year, which is big numbers really in any given year. But 54 million was new construction. So you're hitting record numbers of new development, whether it's business, multifamily, or single family housing. So who's paying the bills isn't just reassessment. It's not just everybody here having higher property values. There's new people sitting down. And I know not everybody loves it. Folks from Seattle are moving in, buying property, or from LA, but they're paying the bills and they're helping keep taxes down for other citizens. So any question on the taxpayers or who your bill payers are? So the next slide is what's the bill? Here's the EP&O bill. And in green, you'll notice that the EP&O levy in the beginning of this was 3 million. And at McCleary time, you were collecting 4.2 million in green. And then you notice that gray bar, the state said, okay, we're gonna fund education. You can't have a big levy locally. We're gonna limit what you can do. And that you couldn't collect 1.9 million in local resources. So you were handcuffed there. And then they started changing the law and okay, their number was arbitrary. So you're able to slowly adjust back up. But if you have community members say your levy is higher than it's ever been, it is still about $300,000 to $400,000 lower than what it was 6 or 7 years ago. And inflation is really taking a toll on that. So a couple challenges there. So as you look to set your next levy in 25 and beyond, sometimes looking at visuals like this will help you decide how much is the right adjustment in collaboration with how much you need to balance a budget without cuts. The ESSER funding cliff is here. Enrollment is down across the state. Just some things to consider is how do you adjust that line? Do you continue how you've done it historically and grow with inflation, or do you need to step it up? Because on the next slide, you'll notice what your tax rate is. So who pays the bills, what the bill is, here's the tax rate. I'm going to start in 2023. Your tax rate this year is $4.46 per thousand. And that is split into two factors. Your EP&O levy is at $2.05 and your bond is at $2.42. Your EP&O levy at $2.05 is 45 cents under your maximum allowed by state law. So you as a board can consider a 45-cent tax increase. You could go all the way down to $1.50 to what you were pre-rated at McCleary, or ask for what you're at currently. There's a million options of what you can decide based on what you need for your educational system here. But it is always important to take a look at historically what has been supported and what you've had here. And it's a little bit of a roller coaster here as well. We talked about your voter support. When the bond passed in 2017, it looks like a pretty significant increase in taxes. So something to be aware of, and how did that impact the elections moving forward? I will share that I had to pick a year to stop, and I picked 2010. If I would have went back a few more years, you would have had a year where it's 594 in tax rates. Or if I went back even further, it's 577. So you had a dip between 2010 and 2017, but there were past years where you're almost to $6 as well in the early 2000s to 2005. Any questions on the tax rate chart? Always find these really interesting. I have another little
I
fun
do have
fact here.
maybe one quick question or maybe a point of clarification now that we're here. So when we look at the EPNO number, you know, it's $1.50 in 2019.
Yep.
But it was $2.14 in 2022, but now it's back down to 2.05. Can you maybe just clarify why it does that?
Yeah, and that really is a representation of what your property value growth.
Okay.
So your growth exceeded estimate. You're using some conservative factors. When you go to the voters and you say it's gonna be, I have a slide coming up on what you told the voters would be. And if you like estimated our community's gonna grow at 3% and it grows at 7%, it doesn't mean you can go increase taxes by 7%. The voters approved the amount. So now we do the math and we take what they approved divided by a bigger tax base, that rate drops down. And so we're noticing is that's one of the reasons your bond, do you notice it started at 296 when it was passed and now it's at 242? Your voters, when you went to the voters, you asked for $3.19 support. And that estimate was conservative. You came in underestimate by like 25 cents to start, which is a great start. You want to make sure that's a ceiling. You are now 77 cents under that number. And that means property values growing faster than the conservative estimates at the time you passed the bond. So when people are concerned, my AVs have skyrocketed. Well, hopefully these tax rates are reducing to offset some of that tax burden.
In some of my classes that you've done and some different things, one of the things that often the public only sees or hears, there's a lack of understanding that we're asking for so much money. We're not asking for the $2 and or the 246 or the 217, and that's often what's heard. And so it's difficult to really share a message that it's going to, right now we predict it will be 240 or 205, right? But what we're asking for is for a dollar amount. And I think that's really hard for some reason to convey because, and I learned this in my class, we don't say we need $7 million, or we don't say it because that's a scary, scary number. So we make it appear that we're asking for the $2 and it feels better, but, right? And so that was one of the things we talked about in the classes that we've had together, right? Was how do you share that that's.
Yeah, they do approve an amount, and I think it's hard if you actually did a rate and you said, and our law allowed that. When property values go up 7%, you're gonna get 7% more, that their taxes are gonna go up exactly that amount. There are some taxing entities in your area that act that way. There are certain cemetery districts or library districts that don't need to ask for this levy renewal. It's set. So we are unique because we're a school district that routinely must renew our levy, and that's when you have the chance to adjust it. But once it's approved, the rate's an estimate, you get the amount. You as a board have the ability every November to think about if you want to adjust that downward, but never upward. Some districts have voluntary rollback a levy to meet a promise. I don't think you've had to do that based on your history here. But it is complicated. People think that my property values went up, the school's gonna get more, and you got what they approved originally. So now is your chance if you want, and if you need more. Now is when the board decides, how's our budget look? Maintaining programs, or do we just keep what we're doing and get a little bit more distance between us and the pandemic? So this is what the school board, in coordination with the school leadership, has control over. We want to be fully transparent that there's other school taxes. When you get your tax statement, there's 4 lines on it that say school. So on the next slide, you're going to see that looks like overlaid. So the same exact slide, but now in light gray, we have this state schools tax. This has always been there. This is how we fund education. State property taxes here. Sales tax is the biggest thing. B&O tax, lottery tax, and cannabis tax. So that's how we're funding education. And if I look at this year, $1.42 in light gray, that will get funded to Olympia, put in the blender, and you'll get it back based on how many special ed students, the teachers you need, your janitorial, your food service, bus routes. And in most schools in Eastern Washington, we're getting more back than we're putting in. Districts like Lake Washington, Seattle, Bellevue are putting in more than they get back. So it's hard to make people happy about that, but that is the reality of it. And then they added a new one, and this new one didn't help. This is when we started noticing schools failing levies. was take a look at the brand new McCleary tax starting in 2018. It came at a really poor time for Prosser because that's the same year your bond started. So that felt big. So if you're a property tax owner, you felt, was that a 40% increase in taxes in 1 year? So is that a hiccup? Is that something that people remembered in the last election? Possibly. It could have been just one thing to add to it. But things have really settled down with those state schools taxes because there are limitations on those. Without getting into the weeds, they can only ask for a certain amount of growth each year. So the rate has been plummeting there as well. State schools tax 1 is down 60 cents. State schools tax 2 is down 40 something cents. Those are coming down. But we like to be transparent because if you go out there and say, great news, we're going to ask for the same tax rate, but don't have an understanding of the state schools tax, there could be a breach of trust there. So we don't advertise these. We don't have any ability to control them, but it sure is great when the school board knows the answer to what the state schools taxes are when people ask. Down the home stretch here, this slide is the slide that shows what you ask voters to approve and what actually happened. And this looks pretty darn good. I'll start in 2023. You asked the voters for $2.13. It's at 2.05. That means you were using some conservative estimates and came in under projection in a positive manner. But you look a year back, remember, we had McCleary limit us to $1.50 at a time we were used to running a higher amount with growth. So there were some challenges there. So we're back into the great estimate range here moving forward. And you're going to be in that same boat in 24, where I look like you're going to exceed expectation as well, depending on what happens with your AP growth. Just a couple more slides. 18, nothing I really will go through other than sharing with you what your peers in the community are having for their tax rates. I will share with you if you need anything based on athletic competitions or like-sized school districts, because there might not be a ton of comps in here that are your FTE range. So let me know if you ever need anything through your business manager or superintendent. We'll get you some numbers on like size based on WIAA competition. If that's usually a little bit more realistic, but just keep us posted on what you need to help decision making. You'll see you compare more favorably to Richland than you would to some of the peers in, West here. And then Kennewick is down because the EP node didn't pass, and Finley as well. So those are a little lower than they've been historically at Kennewick. And then Pasco just passed they're not on your list here. I think they're in Franklin. They passed a 30-cent increase on their bond.
So Finley didn't pass their last.
Finley, Kennewick, and Marysville all have double levy failures.
Okay.
And then they have since passed. So they went in 2023 and passed. So why are we talking now? Because this chart is going to show you when your deadlines are coming up. For a February election, the board must file by December 15th. So we're pretty early, but this was meant to be a baseline discussion, kind of start the juices flowing on what the board is as appetite for when it comes to renewing the levy. But you ultimately need to adopt by your November meeting, which means you have a pretty good idea what you want to do by October for first reading. Whether it's doing something similar than the current, how many years you want to go out, if you want to stretch it back out to 3 or stay with 2. A couple new dates here to think about. On January 26th is the date the ballots will be approximately mailed to your voters. Could be a day earlier or late. That's a great time to get your one-page informational sheet out to the public. So you get that one opportunity to share that. The district has many routes that they can communicate through Facebook or message boards or letters, as long as you're communicating in a manner you accustomedly communicate through. If you don't do videos too often, and all of a sudden you're doing videos like crazy for the EP&O levy, the PDC can find complaint. So one thing districts do is they make sure, like, how do we want to communicate? Let's start doing it right now for kindergarten registration, for graduations. Get those systems in place before the levy starts, so you can use those same methods. And then the county will let you know if it certifies by February 23rd, which happens to be the same exact day that you need to file a resolution for an April election. So we'll know a lot about your levy the night of February 13th. If it's close, a lot of late votes or yes votes. But we'll be in touch as this goes through. We stand at the ready to help with estimates or discussions or review numbers or come back and talk about detailed numbers. but happy to answer any questions before I get out of your hair.
Greater for me. Before.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is pretty helpful. Kind of start the conversation and I know this will be my second levy run, so just all the data that you have in here has been really helpful, so I appreciate you taking the time to come here tonight.
Happy to be here. It was great. Yeah, it was voted on right before I came over. I remember from Israel. Because you work in education, you kind of see it, you can happen. It's pretty cool how the building goes up too. You see those often, except for maybe some higher residential areas, so that's pretty cool.
Any question?
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Gloria.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
I'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Right. Moving on to item C is 2022-23 financial overview and 23-24.
So we don't have a full house tonight. With the presentation, I had added a few slides to just refresh the full finance and how enrollment is calculated and everything. So unless anyone is interested, I can kind of fly through that. I don't know if that would help for you. Yeah, fly through that, okay. So the one thing I will say with the account structure is we did do an update to the NCS codes, which is our object code. So if you'll go. next. The structure, and then. So this is our chart of account with the new object codes in there, but if you go to the next slide. On the left-hand side, those are our old object codes, and on the right-hand side, those are the new object codes. So as you're looking at your expense reports, it's going to change a little bit. You'll notice you'll see some different numbers. There was some merging of different things. So a couple different categories went into one. One will now go into multiple different, so it goes both directions. But by converting it for this fiscal cycle, it will make it easier for us to go to cumulative next year. So we are starting that data merge because there's not that backlog right now. So it did delay the HR budget process a little bit. We had to get this done, but I think we have to say it is done now. And if you have any questions, obviously, feel free to reach out. So I just put this there just kind of for a visual. And then on the next slide, we do still have two parts of the account code structure that we can start to utilize to still get some of that detailed data that might be helpful to the board or to any of the buildings. But we are going to have to build that out kind of from scratch. So right now, with the new NCES codes, there's not one for printers or computers or radios, and we did have that previously. So if we want to utilize that function, we'll just have to assign some account numbers to it and then restart that process going forward. We won't have a lot of that historical data. It's still there under the lumped together expense code, but to break it back out, we'll use user 4 and user 5. So if you have any specific requests, if there's any kind of data that you've looked at in the past that you would like to continue to look at going forward, please just reach out to me and let me know, and I can work with my team to start building it out for you.
Why don't you give them an example of what a user 4 or user 5 might be?
Like 1001 or 4001.
No, what would an example of something that's would be just need to be spread out further?
So the printers, computers, radios, if there's a certain project certain grant that we want, this is specific to the general fund, but like the track project, if we were using any general fund money and not going through capital projects, we could have a code that would, specify that because it's not a location. So we would, it's just any data point that you want to be able to track outside of all of the others, that's when we would use those codes.
I have a Title IV grant, and Title IV, you're required to spend in two parts, but there's a third part and there has to be certain percentages. So we actually have to go back and look and add that up. Whereas if we could just say, well, this was safe and healthy students, this was effective use of technology, and we had another code, we wouldn't have to do that. It would be done. We can just run
That's a
report
great
and know where we
example.
are.
That was a great example. There are times when we as a team need to there's a lot that goes into teaching and learning, and we really need to separate something out so that we can look at it, make a decision moving forward. And that's where those splitting out of those additional numbers come in really handy.
Curriculum, if you want to break down by math, so you have different ones, we can also.
Yeah, that's another good example. So when you see a curriculum expense, you knew that, and this isn't this simple, but one was English and two was math and three, right? Then you could be able to track through the years how much has been sent in English and how much has been sent on math.
And that's in the codes that we don't have built yet.
We don't build them unless we see a need to build them.
And then we would have to start using them. So the next one, that was just capital projects, no change to that. I just didn't know if we had other community members that haven't seen my previous presentation, so we can keep going.
Real quick, can you send out the updated code
Absolutely.
to us, please? Thank you.
So then school apportionment, you're already familiar with this, like, we can probably go through like the next slide. So it's all about apportionment and how we get our prototypical school model. So if anyone in the community is watching this later and would like to learn more about it, I did give a presentation, I believe on March 15th, that covers the same information. So you can go back and watch that, or come to the district office and I can walk you through the process. So status of fund. So here's our general fund. This is where we are projected to end this year. We are projecting to end at just above 4 million, which is still somewhat significantly under what we had originally projected, 4.4 million, but it is still within our allowable fund balance. So we are going to be utilizing some grant funding opportunities. So anything that didn't get charged to grants that is eligible for the grants will move around to get to where we need. So we started our fund balance a little bit higher than we originally projected. And then our revenues came just under, our expenses are over, and that's how we get to our 4 million. So the bottom is just a snapshot of what it has, how the fund balance has gone up and down throughout the year. Any questions on that? For this is going to be super helpful. I didn't get as far in this presentation as I wanted to, but you can always go back and reference it. These are some data points from this date on our personnel. So it gives some really great numbers about our FTE, the base salary, average salary, how many staff we have. So there's 2 slides on certificated, and I can provide this as printed reports as well. And then the 3rd slide is classified. And this was for the 22-23 school year. Next slide. And then some historical comparisons. So enrollment, this is from 15-16 to now. We, as you can see, are still declining. We're right about where we were last year, but overall, we still have the issue of declining enrollment. So next year, it will be a little bit more because of the TK. So we're adding 36 kids for transitional kindergarten. And then the next slide is just an overall, it shows you the district-wide trend at the top. So it's just a little bit different of a visual.
I'm sorry, what is your projection for enrollment next year?
2320, and that's without virtual.
And what's the current?
It's right about that for ending.
Tw-
And I have it on my next presentation, I actually broke it out, so you'll see the kind of the logic behind those numbers. And then this last one, fund balance history. So this just shows our ending fund balance for the last few years. So we're going to land kind of right in the middle of where we've been.
I missed something. What is the, Amy, what was the ending enrollment for this year, and what's the projected enrollment for next year?
It's right about the 2320, but I have another slide in this presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
that
I thought I missed the slide. I thought,
No, I have.
oh, okay,
This
okay,
presentation is for.
okay.
This is really where the meat and potatoes are. So
Okay.
you guys can kind of see where we're.
I thought you went so fast, I missed it. That's okay.
Chill out.
Or outlook. There it goes.
All right, we'll start with the general fund. So this is a snapshot of where we initially anticipate to be. This one includes the general fund, ASB, and debt service funds, but we're gonna focus just right now on the general fund. So we're anticipating revenues of about just over 41 million, expenses at 42 million. We do have a projected loss of 740,000. The one caveat to this is I do need to build out the transitional kinder program that is, so this year it was as a grant, next year it's actually through apportionment, so it will have its own program number, so for the revenue, the expenses. That should help the revenue, the loss just a little bit because it does the enrollment for TK students helps the general overall staffing as well. So we will see a reduction in that just a little bit, and I will get that built out. So we are looking, if we have a $4 million starting fund balance, we plan to end at 3.2. This is more of a conservative when it comes to grants. So if we have any additional grant opportunities out there to bring in additional money, that will help. But this is with all current staffing that we are aware of. So this is the enrollment. That's how I got to the numbers.
Okay.
We go back with, there's
So fast, actually.
There's a few slides on it. Yep, there we go, right there. So the gray column on the left-hand side, that shows our 22-23 budget. And then where we were in April, rolling those forward. Traditionally, we have done like a 1% reduction just because over the last few years, we have had a decline. Well, the last several years, we've had declining enrollment. So that's kind of the logic that we've been using. So applying the 1% reduction, rounding it off and adding TK and at the 2320. And this excludes the virtual students, as I mentioned. So they are part of our enrollment, but then we end up having to pay the the wash. So and then on the next slide, it has the 3-year average. So the 21-22, the current year 22-23, and then the projection for 23-24. So you can kind of see how those numbers have adjusted over the last few years. Any questions on that?
Would you go back to the previous slide?
We've talked about this a little bit before, but that second grade to third grade is where that's, I think, the most significant loss of students, because we go from the 160 to 149 each time. So, I mean,
So one of the things that I was looking at as a team here and looking at is we want to look at cohort. So grade 1 in the first column is now grade 2 in the second column, which is grade 3 in the third column, right? So we're trying to, that's why I asked you to slow down, because I was trying to visually see if there's one particular grade that has dropped drastically. So like I was looking at 6, which was 193, and then it's 194, and then when it's 98, so it's actually gone up. So grade 7 in the first column is 211, it goes to 224, and then it goes back down to 220. Do you see what I'm doing? And so I was trying to see, we're seeing a decline from, look at 9, 10 to, the grade 9 in the first one goes 204 to 177. And 177 to 164. So you've lost, we've lost 40 students in the 10th that are now seniors this year from when they started. That also
Yeah,
in,
part of that's the exclusion of running start areas that are not. So if
Okay.
you look, if you go from the 9th grade 204 to 177, is that because we have 30 running start, or 30 or
There's
40?
running start, and then also from grade, I believe it's, I have it in my notes, but from grade 10 to 11, I believe. I take a 15% hit on that.
That's a
So we have a
historical.
pretty large drop off.
Huge increases though, and like in grades. From like grade 3 went from 146. And one year and the next year, it, or 157 one year to 165 the next year. I mean, that's a huge increase in kids, right? You know, and that's historic, I mean, and it's kind of like all the way through, like grade 4 one year is 141 and the next year When they're
150.
fifth graders, it's 152.
That's 11.
That's a lot of kids.
And we also, it's a little hard to predict what the new housing will do.
Right.
when their
A
families
grade
are gonna-
1 year is 159, and you'd think the next year when they're second graders, it's gonna be close to that, but it's
157.
163. I mean, you know, you'd think one or two, but I mean, that's a.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good size.
This is why FTE and apportionment is so important to be ultra conservative
Right.
when you're putting it in your budget.
That's why I'm thinking, you
Yeah.
know, whew, those are some big numbers.
So back to Deanna's question, does that include the running start head count or just FTE?
But it looks like
It's
it
not, so
doesn't.
those are excluding running start. Is
Okay.
it right
Oh, right.
below
I
it?
see him
And
right
then
below.
added
I
back
see him right
in?
below. Yep, thank you.
I just need my binoculars.
I know.
Don't feel glasses.
It's just
So
gonna get better. There's no-
is, Deanna, is the 22-23 to 23-24? We increased college in the high school, so the 53 running start to 32 running start, is that part of the increase of college in the high school?
It's possible. I used more of the year, towards the year end.
So prior to our big, right, big growth, we had almost 120 kids at Running Start. So that had dropped down to like that 50 to 60 range, which has been kind of the standard for years since Running
Mhm.
Start's been possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So you get some of that too. That attributes some of that decline. But I do think that decline in kid, that's a really important area that we carefully examine the
That's for
any
3.
reduction.
The CTE students that go to Kennewick, are they counted in this amount, or are they counted different, like running start students? Are they
TriTech.
that's right there?
I've never seen TriTech separated,
Okay.
but
it's-
technically they're in Kennewick, so.
So does Kennewick gets those.
No,
FTEs?
so we get a
We pay
head
them.
count. We pay them, so if, I'll just use, so let's say we get $100 a student. We pay them traditional, depending on the number of percentage of the day. We pay them 93% of the FTE and we keep 7 for the bookkeeping and record keeping of that. So we
But
pay.
there's technically still our kids, just like an online kid, they're
Yeah.
still on our count,
Mhm,
but a lot of the money for them is going. out.
yeah, 93%.
When we submit the enrollment reports, we submit it. in our- This is kind of a snapshot of the general fund, again, a historical kind of overview from 21, 22, 22, 23, and 23, 24. Starting off with the enrollment and staffing, and then financial, the revenues, expenditures, beginning and end fund balances. Then it breaks out the expenditures from summary by program and by activity. So it's just a kind of a data point. You can look at different trends and see how we budgeted over the last few years for the general.
So one question I might have, and maybe clarification for those here watching in the future. If I'm reading, if I can see it right, I think it says 47 and change million for 22, 23. Right?
Great.
And now we're going down to 42. You probably know where I'm going this, but how much of that is ESSER that we don't get this year?
3.5 million
Mhm.
was budgeted. So the difference is that last year's budget included the ESSER capital projects allocation in the general fund, but really the money is coming through capital projects this year. So the revenue and the expenses were both included on the budget, but the money is not going to be going. The money is not staying in general fund. So next year, there won't be, we're going to spend it all this year, but if there were, you wouldn't see it on this, you would see it on the capital projects budget. We do have in the budget for 23, 24, there's about 350,000 in ESSER 3 funds that we do plan to spend. Of the ESSER 3 20%.
And we've spent quite a lot of, we have ESSER 2 funds in 22, 23 also, so. There's a lot of ESSER setting, that's why it's so much higher, that it's closer to 5 million, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah, 5, maybe even. with
Yeah.
ESER two and three in the 22-23 year.
So I'd like to talk, and Amy and I talked about, I was gonna talk about this at this point. We're gonna be talking about the interim superintendent evaluation plan and setting some goals. One of the concerns in looking at this 23-24 budget is the total ending fund balance of the 23-24 budget that you see up there is below our school board policy. So one of the early on projects of my job is going to be to figure out how we are going to adjust that through the year to assure that we meet our school board policy and do not have to ask for an exception. And that exception doesn't just come to me to even say, okay, I need you to amend the school board policy. That's a way bigger project than that. And so it will be, where are the areas in which we can save? And if you look at that, we're not talking about a couple $100,000. We're talking $800,000 that in a weird, not quite 800, I guess, $754,000 or so that has to be managed. And I hate to even use the word cut. I would more call it saved, properly managed. Because to have that amount, that's not like changing from 2-ply toilet paper to 1-ply toilet paper. I mean, and I'm being kind of facetious, but I'm saying it's not in how we order the toilet paper. It's not $750,000 is what I'm getting at. So we have to really take a look at our budget and figure out where are the places that we can really sit down and look at that and that's will be my first task.
So the next one just breaks out the types of revenue, same thing, so the 3-year overview history, so the revenue and the expenditures. A different way to look at it. So our property taxes, pretty self-explanatory. Our state programming and federal programming, again, you'll see that, the dip with ESER. Overall. kind of status quo. We are experiencing obviously inflation with salaries and expenses as well. So you'll start to see expenses go up. We just have to make sure that we have revenue in place to cover those expenses, which is another problem that we have. Any questions on this one?
There's one
Yeah.
thing, can you go back a few slides? Well, ask your question first.
Can you explain to why? If I think I'm on the right line. Third one down on our expenditures. Why did special education go up 800,000?
For next year?
Yeah.
They increased the percentage. Increased the percentage for funding for special education from 13 point something to, so I think there's that potential. And there was probably some budgetary increase in the budget. I couldn't tell you exactly, but
We also have experienced a pretty significant increase in staffing.
So
Administrative position.
that isn't-
Alone.
that's an area that's a
than
big
6%.
challenge for us, as is a great overage.
And contracts and, additional SLP help and yeah, it adds up.
One-on-ones.
So that's an example of what I was kind of saying about my task, right?
Mhm.
Like our speech language, our occupational therapist, it's each one of those. And so my task would be to come to you and say, okay, the question was why did the special education expenditure prediction go from 4.6 to 5.4? And so my task then is to come back and say, here's 2 people, here's this much to the ESD, here's this much for programming. The part that is a little deceiving is they, in this year's legislature, they gave us more money for special education. So I want to try and be careful in this so that I don't misspeak. And this is what Deanna was talking to. I think the piece is this: we paid more out of basic education for special education because we got less. Now we're getting more in the line in revenue in special education. So we're spending more special education dollars. So let me see if I can, for those who are listening, if in the state legislation, our allocation allotment would have been $15 for special education. And it cost us 20. $5 of that would have come out of basic education dollars expenses. Now they're giving us 17, right? And so now expense out of special ed goes up to 3 and it goes down in basic ed. And that's how it should work. And so that's part of my homework to you is to really get, I don't want to say finite, but this is the people, this is the program, this represents the 800,000 or in each of those programs. That's my job to you.
So I know sometimes you'll ask like, have we reduced staff? What have we done? So if you look at the bottom 2 lines in our FTE for certified employees, in 2021, we had 191.55. We reduced 16 for this year to get this year. So 16 people. That's usually, depending on what those positions are, $1 million, $1.2 million. I mean, so we are reducing. This year, that the prediction for next year, where we're at next year is maybe down a couple. But if you look at the classified at the bottom, okay, one thing that we keep getting added is one-on-one paraeducators, one-on-one paraeducators. I know that our new special ed director, she feels there's better, more equitable ways to serve students than one-on-one paraeducators. So I know that there's going to be work done, and it is a better model to not use one-on-one paraeducators. So I think that's something you'll see their adjustments. So when we're like, have you cut staff? Yeah, we like 16 certified staff. That's a lot. But it's all been, we've been able to do that through attrition, but some of that's catching up because there was a lot of overstaffing in the years previous, and we're trying to get to where as close to prototypical, it's kind of, I mean, to truly do that is, it's not realistic. And most districts do spend more money on special education than they receive, but ours is up there.
Can you go back to the slide? It basically had our revenue and expenses. Is that,
This
Yep,
one does,
yep.
yeah.
okay, thank you.
So all the bold.
So here, so this is, I guess, my question. You know, I'm looking at our expenses, regular instruction is our highest, right? It's 19.8 million last year. And I think it says 19.9 this year. So we're up 100,000 in regular instruction. I guess, how are we going to get this negative 740 to a more manageable number in time to have a budget finalized in a month and a half?
I think some of those things are talking about contracts and the added expenses to supplemental contracts, all the supplemental contracts that we have. Looking at which contracts are up for renegotiation without hitting one particular group,
Mhm.
right? You can't say, okay, we're gonna say you have 5 bargaining units in the Prosser School District, and so this one's up, we gotta take it all out of one. Well, that's not an equitable way to do things. So we look at supplemental contracts, we look at travel is a big one. Travel is a big one. Those are the 2 biggest ones, supplemental contracts and travel.
Sometimes it's making adjustments to like, looking at your staffing, and sometimes things change, like, oh, we have this reading teacher and we were paying part of them with basic ed, and we do have some of that, like they're part basic ed and maybe part lab. Do we have some funds where we could take that basic ed FTE off and cover with grant funding? I think it also, I mean, some of what, we're dealing with, this team is dealing with is some of the bargain agreements that have happened over the years that, we have to manage. And so we're paying out a lot more for employees than we take in. We think our employees are worth millions and millions of dollars, but it's hard. It makes it very difficult. We have when you have experienced staff as well, because that's, the state changed. They used to give us the amount of
You
money.
used to
that
get
each-
more per
And we don't. get that
longevity and we don't
anymore.
get that.
But, yeah, it is something like, will we be able to fix that? No, in a month, no, but we can make it better and we can keep working on it. It's gonna be very hard to keep that zero by the end of next month, but we certainly can work on it. And we have some ideas to get closer.
Yeah, and I don't, going through our third budget cycle, I think this year, working on it, I guess my second. Having a fund balance or excess of revenues, being a more manageable number needs to be our priority, so.
And we couldn't make it perfect last year, but we made it better than it was. Of course, there's always expenses that happen, but there's some systems that need to be put in place to help refine some of some of this HR overage and some of those things that are happening. And that's all something that we're working on. It's gonna help.
Little things like, we do budget for overtime. We try to put in some buffers for those things. We know every year they happen. But as a board, if you say absolutely no overtime or no extra days, this or that, put that in place now, we can reduce the budget a little bit, knowing that we're not gonna allow those things. Now, some conversations for that is if a student is lost or if a student is still at the end of the day, well, a secretary has to stay. There has to be some wiggle room for stuff like overtime. If something breaks, if the HVAC unit breaks, we have to have our maintenance staff come in and help that. But we can redo. So there's little things that we can do that we did build into the budget that we.
But
can
overtime,
not-
how much last year? I know the year before it was probably 300,000.
It adds up.
So
And then
those are examples.
So we can definitely brainstorm some of those
We,
options.
we build
And
in capacity also for like the emergency HVAC. But one of the things is that if we truly have something break, there is in the state of Washington, emergency repair grants, right? They don't work for planning to fix something. But if you are in, I don't know, October and you turn that boiler on for the first time and it doesn't work, there are emergency repair grants that you can apply for. That's an example. So that you don't have to have the capacity in your budget.
In this budget, I did follow past practice with building in a $650,000 reserve on both sides, the revenue and the expenses. So in case we do get additional grant money or something that comes in that we are allowed to spend on that, it's on its own little account. So we can move that around once budget's approved. But that was really helpful this year. So when we got the ECF funding, E-rate funding more than we had budgeted for, we did have that line item that allowed us to spend that. We also had ESSER this year, so we wouldn't have had an issue with appropriations, but something just to think about going forward, that there is a buffer in here, both on the revenue and the expenditure side. Any other questions on general fund? Next slide. Sorry, I was on that slide on my computer. So this is fund balance. We've kind of already talked about it. Again, the historical 3-year average. So capital projects and planning for the future. So I have a couple different options to present. So this first one is just a snapshot of some of the issues that were brought to my attention, things that needed repaired, things that we would have to spend money on, capital projects. So it's nothing official as far as we didn't get quotes for some of these things. Some we did, some we did not. But just to put them on our radar and have that conversation about a more proactive approach to capital projects. And we've talked about like a master plan. So I wanted to just get it on paper as an idea, like just to start tracking it and how do we want to fund these. So I'll stop it right there for a second, just so you can read it. And then the next slide will be. Thank you.
Why does a door height need to be repaired?
Go back.
Why does a door the new remodeled height?
There was one door at Heights and one door at KRV that was brought up. So when I was doing like the projection, that is there anything else you could possibly need out of capital projects? Both of the principals had mentioned there was a door that I think needed to be, I don't know if it had a window and shouldn't, or if it didn't have a window or something, but there's a door, I believe, at each of those locations that needed.
Why
I
would they
didn't
not be
really-
just on a
I
regular?
thought, I didn't know if it
maintenance.
was the door. I
care of
thought it was because they wanted to switch up because they have like an opening window in their front that they want to switch up like Kevin does to not open. I thought that's.
So I know there was one, so the entrance at Heights, Jody wanted the entrance to be redone at Heights. And then there was a door at each of them. So again, it was kind of a placeholder. It's, I mean, there's gonna be enough contingency. Those ones are tiny, not a big deal. But also to just try to start compiling all these projects and having a place for them. At the bottom, you'll see the preventative maintenance, and I just threw out some numbers for different things. But if we are intentional about earmarking our money for, intentional preventative maintenance, saving up for roof repairs or replacement, saving up, for those replacements, then we wouldn't have to have so much pressure about capital levies or bonds. It's a hard approach, like you have to start, sooner than later and start saving it up and then make sure that everyone knows what the savings is for. It's not that, we're saving it for a rainy day, but we're saving it for a rainy day. Tab. So then the next slide, yes,
Not to interrupt. So the white church, we're not using that for any purposes at this time.
we are
correct?
not, but we
Boys
do
and Girls
own it.
Club.
Correct.
So once they're out, we do not have a long-term plan for it. It is not up to fire code. And so if we are going to use it, we would have to spend the money to get it up to code. We've just had the asbestos issue and then, there's this. So we just have to decide whether we're gonna try to sell it or just let it sit there or what we're gonna do with it. But it was pretty expensive, especially to not have anything going on there.
So we had a bid to do the security in there. It was like $90,000 to upgrade or put in the security for just the white church.
So then the next slide was kind of an idea of how we could build this out. So there's two, this slide and the next one. This one is based on approximately a 1% redirection of apportionment, which would have to be upon board approval only. And I'm not completely versed in that. I just know that it would be an option we could pursue additional information on. The next slide would present a 5% redirection of apportionment. So looking at the fund balance in the capital projects, what it could look like in approximately 5 years. So if we start putting away 200,000 a year or even $1 million, now with a general fund balance in the negative, it'd be really, really, really hard to justify putting even more into the capital projects. But as we move the expenses around, or if we look at our staffing, we have to decide what's more important. Do we want to take care of our facilities and make sure that we do have a plan when things break, or, we want to have a replacement plan? Or do we want to just keep things running, keep our staff, at the level that we have now? And that's just kind of a decision that you have to make and go with. But I wanted to at least present it as an option for future thought. If we are concerned about passing a bond or a levy, a bond, we don't really, I know that Corey covered this already. The only thing we have is the middle school, but it is aging quite a bit now. And so then we have to decide whether we go for a capital projects levy for that, or if it gets too big, we go for bond. And then the other thing is, in 20 years, what do we do when all of these new wonderful, fabulous facilities are starting to fall apart again? If we start planning now, in 20 years, we'll be in a really good place. And as we have more money in the bank, we are earning interest on that. So we're making our money work for ourselves, just as anyone's personal finances could do the same. So there's just two ideas. I didn't do any of them for the 23-24 year. I didn't anticipate us making those decisions for this fiscal year. I just wanted to get it on your radar. And then if you want to work with the business manager next year, going into 24-25, it'd be a good point to have the conversation. So.
Well, I appreciate these last two slides, because this is what I've been asking for at least 2 years. Part of, as we finish the strategic plan and get that buttoned up, and then work on our facilities plan, a lot of this will force us to go through these exercises, but I do appreciate you putting this together.
So that was it on capital projects. Debt service fund, this one's pretty straightforward. This is the account that we use to pay for the bond. And then we also have a bus purchase, the vehicle purchase that we're finishing up. So the bus acquisition from 2019, our final payment will be September 1st. And then we have the vehicle non-voted bond that we have 2 years for. So this one is the history with the right-hand column being the anticipated flow for next year. And then the next slide is the projection going forward. So in 26, 27, we'll only have the bond left going out of the debt service fund. So the debt service fund is funded with the bond, the property taxes from that. For the vehicle purchase, that's funded with PILT. So we have just over 300,000 right now in PILT money. So just as the payments are due, we transfer the money in there. It pays for the payment, and the remaining balance remains in the PILT. But any questions on debt service?
What's the balance in the PILT fund?
It's about 300,000. So we don't have, it's an account managed by the county, but we don't actually have like a school fund for it. I don't understand the concept, to be honest. But I do get a monthly report of that, so I could share that at any time, but we don't have it in our account team.
But we have about $300,000. And how much do we still owe on our vehicles?
120,000.
So we could go ahead and just pay them off
We
and
could.
be done with it.
Because
But then we wouldn't be getting PILT money in unless we still owed money on something else.
we have the bond, I was told because we have the bond, we're good.
We're going,
And we'll continue to get the pill as long as we have the bond in place.
or buses that we're paying for.
Correct, that too. So our last payment for the bus is gonna be September 1, and then we'll be done. And since we did the interfund loan, we don't have any new
Okay.
debt for that. But I was told that PILT, we'll still get PILT as long as we have the bond. So
Good.
we've still got quite a few years left for that.
Good.
And we would have the opportunity, if we needed more buses or needed different vehicles or something, that we could use the additional.
As long as we have a capital debt.
What's the, I know this has been said a million times, but what can you use PILT for? Exactly.
To pay back debt related things. So
Just
for
any
the-
debt service, right?
Yeah, so if we purchase the tennis courts off of a debt, like a 1-year debt, and we pay it off with PILT, we could do that.
Okay.
We don't have enough, I mean, there wouldn't be enough in there to do that project, but.
It's
that's
an example.
But if we borrowed money. to
Okay.
do it.
To do it.
And what's the amount that we kind of get from PILT each year?
30 to 50,000.
Thank you.
So the next one is ASB. So this year, I did go a little bit more conservative. I reduced some of the anticipated revenues on ASB because I feel like it was just inflated more
They
than we
always do
ever,
that.
yeah, it's always way inflated. So it's usually a budget of, about 800,000. Or last year was 800,000, and we're spending between 300,000 and 400,000 really, and bringing that in. The one dangerous part, I guess, is when you anticipate you're gonna get 800,000 in revenue and you're anticipating you're spending 800,000, you're in trouble if you spend 800,000 without bringing in the 800,000. So I just wanted to take a little bit more of a conservative approach. Also, I've been working with the high school to try to spend down their ASB account because it's not supposed to be a savings account. Supposed to get the money, spend it on the student. The students who raise the money are supposed to get the benefit of those monies as well. And so there are some plans for different sports and stuff to buy new uniforms, to buy new equipment and start spending down their money. So not spend it just to spend it, but so that it's more current. So that's the plan with that. So it does look like there'd be a loss, but that's intentional unless the board doesn't want us to go that direction. But they still budgeted pretty high on some of the fundraisers. Any questions on it?
This is an example of where universal, not universal, a good thing to improve, let's say, a music program where the ASB buys some instruments that are used by all students, would be an example. Or and the idea with that is if you're a 9th grader and you raise money, then you're benefiting from that instrument usage. rather than the savings. So you might have worked really hard as a student for 4 years and you really didn't benefit during that time in the class 5 or 6 years from now is to benefit. And that's the intent of student body is you earn it and then you use it.
You take off. Hey, thanks, Anthony.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thanks.
On Friday, maybe again?
Would that be okay? Okay. Do you want, send me an email with the time?
So, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna add a side note on ASB, that right now band, that they, one other can't think of, they are going through ASB. In working with the business manager at Grandview, because that is more of a curricular thing, we really should shift that off of ASB and onto the general fund. Not everything, so they're still gonna do some activities that are ASB in band. But the majority of what they do is curricular. If they're charging fees and they're going on, curricular trips, getting credit for it, that's against ASB rules. So I've talked to them to just let them know, hey, anticipate a change next year. Or, as long as the next business manager is willing to take those steps to move it to the general fund. We'll have to change our chart of accounts and do some things, but just so the board's aware that over the next year, going into this process next year, hopefully we'll be able to make that shift as well. They're some of the highest grossing and spending accounts in ASB, well over 100,000 between that whole group. Probably a good, maybe not 100,000, maybe like 60 to 80,000, but it's pretty high.
So
between those.
is that monies raised by those specific groups and then it will get earmarked back into the general fund for those specific groups? Okay.
Correct. Yes, we have to have a very good tracking, which we can. It's not hard to do that.
I just had one quick question. I think I can see it's like 280 for revenues and 270 were actuals for 21-22. And then we budgeted 800 and
Remember that was coming out of COVID, 2 years of no fundraising. That was a much more probably conservative year than the
Okay.
usual.
We did that
Yeah.
contract. Yeah. The 400 is right about our average on a regular year
400 in revenue.
in expenses.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that was all for ASB. Moving on to the next, we'll do the transportation vehicle fund. This one is also pretty straightforward. So because we were able to do the interfund loan this year, we're not taking on new debt. So I did want to ask the board, or food for thought. We are going to be getting a depreciation payment in August of next year. So the one that we get in August of this year will just pay for the loan that we had this year. And then we're kind of at a wash. We'll end it with $50,000 left in that account. So then next year, we're gonna get almost 400,000 in depreciation. So we can either do another interfund loan with the general fund next year and use that depreciation payment to pay for it, or wait until the next year and pay cash, because it'd already be in the bank, and then we wait. It is very important that I put it in the budget. If we even think for a second, we might buy a bus next year, I would want to put it in there as an appropriation, so it doesn't have to be a budget extension. If you don't go forward with the purchase, that's okay. The money will just sit in there, or you'll wait till the money comes in and it will just sit in there. If I build it out in the budget, then we wouldn't have to come back and redo all of that.
I'd put it in the budget.
Okay.
Don't you think?
Well, wouldn't that be a question for Ami?
I think she'd be more than it,
Well-
more than.
Well, I mean,
excited to
but
do
how does it
Wanna
fit?
buy a bus.
But how does it fit in her transportation plan? And
Or
we
like
just
her-
bought
We just.
4
bought-
buses,
we
right?
bought 3.
Over the last 2 years.
When she came to the board last year, she had asked for 5. She got approval for 5 and we got 3. So she technically still got approval for 2 more.
Okay.
But we were trying to wait from a cash flow perspective to maximize that.
And you don't have to spend it.
Yeah.
You just put it in the budget so you can if you want. to.
Okay.
And the depreciation always pays for the next bus. So it's which is sort of, it's dangerous, because you're like, well, we're just buy a bus, then we'll get the next bus covered. And then if you don't buy buses. then-
Versus the other way, oh, here it comes, then let's buy a bus.
Yeah, so it's,
It does help to have a constant flow. So if,
Right.
if I had to make the decision, I'd say have 1 bus a year in a way, as long as it was, because then if you have 2 at once, then you're also 2
Yeah.
falling off of depreciation at the same time. But if you have 1 at a time, it goes. Just for clarification, depreciation
Right.
only covers the amount, the state rate. So for example, the last 2 buses that we purchased, about 40,000 of each of those was above what's actually reimbursed through depreciation. So at some point, we're not gonna get enough in depreciation to cover the same number of buses. That is something we really need to kind of change our practice on going forward, but for right now, where we are with the general fund, we have enough to easily buy one more bus with this depreciation.
It doesn't work to buy one bus a year though, because with 20 some buses, your oldest bus is 20 some years old. So that's why you have to get more than one bus at some point, even if it's one bus, two buses, if you just did one, we would have a fleet with buses, several buses.
Because they're only
15
about
buses.
7 years, right? Is the shelf life roughly?
Depreciation, I think, is 15 years, doesn't it? Take 15?
Yes, I believe.
Yeah, and when we started this process, we were like,
They were super
bus
old.
fleet
yeah.
was in really bad shape,
Yeah.
so, but, if,
And now he's been trying to clean it up, get rid of some of the old buses, so we really know where we are. with
kind
our
of let the
fleet.
state pay for our new buses every couple of years, so.
So looking at, and if you'll go to the next slide, please. You can look at the anticipated depreciation based on our
Yeah.
current fleet. The two numbers in blue are blue because if we do get another bus or two, then those numbers will actually go back up. So. With the 284 and the 182 and the depreciation.
Kind of a blue color.
It's not super out there. It was just.
Oh,
kind of a
I think I
reminder.
can see it.
It's just a reminder. It's not supposed to flash in your face too much. But so if you're looking at the 2 years, that's over 700,000, that can buy 3 buses. Maybe, probably about 3 buses. And 2 nicer buses. So I know Ami's got plans for exactly what kind of buses that she's wanting. We do just have to keep in mind that those are upgraded buses, they cost more. And so at some point, we do need to have a plan in our general fund to start. Same thing, the redirection of apportionment for capital projects. We would want to consider the same thing for transportation. So maybe $20,000 a year or $50,000 a year that we can start putting in here. So we can keep our fleet as large as it needs to be, but also have the money in there when we need to purchase it. So this version of the 23-24 did not include the interfund loan. And so if you'll go back a slide, Ashley. Thank you. So I did put about $9,000 in there for interest. So when we do the interfund loan, we do still have to pay interest, but it's paying interest to ourselves. So I put a number in there. So it charges, and it's kind of funny because we're going to charge it, the general fund's going to get the interest, but then have to pay the difference, but we can't fund the depreciation later. So it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. But anyways, it's in there. So if I'm hearing everything correctly, I should go ahead and just put a bus purchase on 23-24, just in case the board decides to go that direction. And then we would do an interfund loan again.
I think that's a conservative approach.
Okay. Perfect. So that's all I had. And the next one is the cash flow, just so you can see, because when we're looking at budget, we're always looking at the whole year. But this actually breaks down the timing of what that might look like. So we'll get the depreciation in August. It's August 31st, so it's the last day of the fiscal year. So it's a little tricky, but that's when we get it. And then going into the next year is when I had originally planned for those buses. So
How nervous are you when our estimated fund balance in September is $54,000?
not at all, because it's not an account that has any movement unless I tell it to have movement.
Oh, no, but I'm sorry. I was thinking of it as a different.
Sorry,
I mean, that's transportation. I think I was like general fund. I'm like, I had a mini heart attack for a second.
There's no more expenses that will come out of this, only interest payments between now and then, so it might shift just a little bit, but it should land right about there. So. And the depreciation, that amount has already been, or I'm sorry, in 22-23, so in the previous slide, the depreciation is already confirmed through apportionment, so. So that's all I have for, transportation. Oh, I take that back. This is the schedule. This is what our depreciation schedule looks like at the moment. 22-23 is off from the formula because we had an insurance claim and then we got rid of buses mid-year. And so this is automated based on, like, you put the type of buses in and then it tells you your amount. So that's why I put it in orange. But the rest of the numbers should be accurate going based on our current fleet.
But then if you have newer buses, there's more depreciation, so the numbers down below go up.
It adds back, yep, which is why it's so important to kind of have that regular cycle of newer buses so we can. Get that depreciation again.
This is be what it looks like if we didn't buy one more bus.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. Then that is all. I didn't know if we were gonna have community members here, but I was just gonna say about the budget process. So we have to have our final budget approved by the board of directors by August 31st. We are planning to have the adoption on August 23rd, so we'll have the budget hearing for that, and we'll have to post that in the newspaper at least 2 weeks prior. So unless advised otherwise, that will be the plan for August 23rd. That does leave us 1 week, so if there's any reason why we would have to delay it, we would have to have a special board meeting on the 31st. But I don't anticipate needing that unless the board advises us that way. And if anybody wants to see where we are with the budget, they can always stop by my office. I'd be happy to walk them through it. And by law, we're required to do that, but I'd be happy to actually walk them through and answer any questions. That's all I have for. 23.
Great, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, any further questions on that? Peggy, Jeannie?
I think I'm good. Good job.
If there's any other data points that you would like or specific, way to look at data or something, just let me know, please. And I'll
Moving on, superintendent evaluation and goals.
So I provided you with in your document, you have the WASDA guide, the WASDA rubric, and then a summarization of the 8 criterion and some how it traditionally is done by the board of directors in the first page. Choose that. I have it is quite simple, actually, even though it sounds complex. I literally have a file box that has criterion 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in it. And throughout my tasks, I put the evidence for those in that box. And then I give you the box and you use that evidence plus the experiences you have with me to look at the rubric and make the decision. There's a couple things that are kind of unique here. The scale of 1 to 5 is used for a lot of items, but 5 is used for items not to be rated. So traditionally, and this is why it's open for discussion today before we agree upon it. Traditionally, you would choose 6 of the 8 criterion. For example, there's one here on levies and bonds. It's about processing levy and bonds. On a non-levy year, you probably wouldn't do that one. And as an interim, you may be choosing to look at my evaluation differently than you would had I been a permanent super. Does that make sense? So you may choose that. So this is for your tool, for you to decide. And then you just tell me as a collective, we would discuss with you individually or in small group. And we can go through it different. I do want you to understand the Washington State-based superintendent framework is on the WASDA website. If you want more additional information, you just click there. You have a password for each of you as your WASDA members. You can get at that. I want to talk about rubrics, and we're late and I'm going to be quick. Generally, what you see in a rubric is like an unsatisfactory did not, a satisfactory or a basic, however wording you like to use, is or some, proficient is most, and distinguished is I use the word all because 100% is very difficult. Regularly, better word than all, generally, mostly, right? Because if you look at any of them, you'll see those kinds of words in there, and that's generally how a rubric moves across. It's a little different as a superintendent because some things are, you do them once or twice a year. You don't do them every single month, or you don't do them that way. This is rubric that is used with many of my peers across our region, if not, I would say a majority of the state. But it's a very transparent. What I would hope to do would be to, for public record, would be to make the little box with all the evidence, you might say, available for 30 days. People could look or have input. Allow you an open forum to have input for an X number of days in case there's somebody in the public would like to give you input. And then obviously as an interim, it works a little different, but then that traditionally is done in April, May-ish. As then we work on the next contract cycle, had I been your permanent superintendent. And so with the hope that early on in July, August, you roll this out, we set the goals. One of the things we've talked about is budget, graduation rate, communication, trust. We have some things. So I would like guidance from you. Do you want me to write some goals and present them to you? Would you like to give me your buzzwords, buzz areas? Or, you know what I'm saying, the 3 or 4 main areas? And then, or would you like to write them as a group as my goals? And then we collectively agree upon them. I don't know what Prosser's done in the past. So I'm happy. I want to be really open, and I'm all about goal-driven and data-driven information. And so that's what I'm just presenting this to you now for discussion. And then you could give me some guidelines or tools as to how to do that.
Any questions?
No, I'm glad to see us work towards the WASDA model.
Yes. And that's much like a teacher, right? If you were a Danielson school or we're a Cell school or a 5D, right? The hope is from the world of superintendents is if you receive a certain score in Prosser and another superintendent's at a conference and they are from, I don't know, Timbuktu, Northeastern Washington, wherever it might be, the score that we receive is similar. We're rated equally. We're rated professionally. And it really isn't used very much. I mean, unless you're trying to move up or do something, but it is very a transparent tool. And then this evaluation, for my own peace of mind and transfer, it would be shared publicly. Because that's just, I maybe not all of the notes, but the overall score rating and any notes to the public. Because they need to be able to have a thought on that.
You know, I kind of like what you mentioned about you telling us what your goals are. And if anybody else feels that way, that appeals to me because then we know exactly where your interests lie and what you want to work on. And then if there's other things that we feel you should be focusing on, then we could say this is more important.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's shared.
yeah.
So I'm happy to do it any which way.
Yeah.
I'm very flexible and really
Mhm.
open to that. Think on it. Just share with me if you would like to do a short executive session sometime, so we can really get into that negotiation piece of what those look like. More than happy to do that with the finals obviously being public.
Mhm.
Kind of the way I would envision this process to go is a lot what you said, Deanie, is, you come up with whatever goals, 4 or 5 or whatever it is that you want to focus on.
Mhm.
I think we as a group can come up with, a set of goals, and you can send them to me and we'll kind of compile them and then come up with a proper way to do this.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I would like to do, I don't want to be the atypical evaluation. I think we should do one halfway through the year
Mhm.
and towards the
Yep.
end of the year.
Absolutely.
That way, there's a metric
Mhm.
at the beginning and we show a metric at the end.
Mhm.
And then we can kind of work, however it works out, you can kind of work on.
If there's something, there's an area that's not quite as strong as you were
Yeah.
hoping it would be, right?
Yes.
And that's what we do with our teachers, right? We do
Right.
2 observations a year and we come up with an evaluation there. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of the pulse and the
Mhm.
pulse, and then we come up with that. But I think that's an awesome idea.
I like that.
But having a tool that we can all agree on early on, so
Yes.
that before that 6 months is up, she knows this is a tool we're working towards.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. So we'll
No
develop,
surprise.
we'll develop this evaluation form based on the goals that we come together as a
Right.
group. I kind of foresee us. December's probably not but maybe like the first part of January doing
That's awesome. Yep.
like a mid-year evaluation and then, maybe look towards,
Late May.
yeah, something like that. Do a follow-up. and
I'm
go from
super
there.
excited about, so if I'm hearing you correctly, a set of goals written by me and some guidelines. And so, I mean, what I think.
Yep.
My focus is based on our one-on-one meetings and the things that we've done, and what we've seen in the 100-day plan and what's going on, right? And then I'll write those and then you will review them, give me feedback, and we'll come settle those.
Yep, we'll come.
Is that
up
what I'm
with-
hearing?
Yeah, we'll come up with
Feedback.
Sounds good.
4 to 5 goal, 3 to 5 somewhere goals that we feel individually. You can send them to me and then
Okay,
we'll
we'll
kind of
talk-
compile
Okay,
and then have a discussion with the group and,
Okay.
come
Like that.
together on a consensus.
That's good, yeah.
Works for me.
yep.
Okay. Any other questions, comments regarding that? Hearing none, so future meetings, regular board meeting will be next Wednesday, July 26th, right here in the Prosser High School workroom at 6 p.m. No further business. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.